Harrow the Ninth. Let me just tell you, I checked this book out from the library 3 or 4 times. And that's how long it took me to get through it. I finally did it. Thank you, thank you. I know. It's a beast in its own way. So we're just gonna jump into it. Here are the warnings if you want to just hit pause and look at them in detail. Enjoy. But just so you know, I didn't actually start keeping track of all of this stuff until about page 298. Yeah, 298 is when I started tracking all these things. Even so, it's a good representation of how most of the book is. Like, anyway, you know, most of these things, it applies. Also, if you are thinking of picking up Gideon, I would say that these books are about comparable as far as like most of the adult content, except more swearing, much more profanity. Gideon is a very crass and vulgar character. She's a lot of fun, but she's got a mouth on her, okay? So if you're thinking of picking that up, just get ready for a lot of, yeah. Anyway, as far as language goes, explicit, absolutely explicit. I mean, there was a character that came into the story and literally the first chapter that they were in, from the time that I started tracking, they quadrupled the number of F-bombs. So definitely explicit, definitely mature. And then as far as frightening or intense scenes, okay, so this one, I kind of just merged this category as well as the violence and gore. This is a story about necromancers, so it's going to be extremely violent. There's going to be lots of gore. They go into a lot of detail about, like, you know, the dermis, the skin, and your nails, and your flesh, and your tendons, and your ligaments, and your bones, and all of that stuff. The entire book is that way. You don't escape it. So if you are squeamish at all or, you know, easily frightened, I feel like a lot of these things kind of go hand in hand in this book. So I probably wouldn't recommend it to you to pick up. As far as, for me and my personal taste, I would say it was just fine. It was a bit explicit, but it wasn't like, but it didn't feel like it was going into extremely graphic detail. It's just kind of like a necessity to correctly convey what the author is seeing or envisioning. So explicit, but you know, if you get through Gideon and you're like, oh, okay, like I can handle that, then this should be fine with you. And this kind of surprised me, but when it comes to the sexual content or nudity of this book, it's moderate but bordering on mild. It exists much more in this book than it did in the previous one in Gideon. But yeah, I mean, honestly, all you get is some kissing, and then there's some brief discussion, or there's a brief mention of like, they're gonna have a 3-way, and you're just like, oh, okay. And then there's this weird moment where they're kind of discussing that a guy's semen was collected without his knowledge or consent while he was enjoying some sexual relations with other people. It doesn't go into graphic detail, but it mentions it, so if that's something that is beyond your comfort level, be aware. And I've given you the page numbers for those things, so you should be able to skip them. One note that I want to make that's kind of, it made me hesitant when I was picking up this series, and I figure maybe it's something that other people are thinking of too. If you look at the advertising for it, especially on Gideon, I mean, it makes such a big deal of the character's sexual orientation, and it makes a big deal about like, oh, she's got a lot of porno mags, like, oh my goodness, haha, so funny, like she's into some really filthy stuff. And if you go into it like I did, you're kind of apprehensive because you're like, is this gonna play like a big role in things? Like, is there just gonna be lots of killing things and then raising them from the dead and then lots of sex? Like, because, you know, I don't know. I was kind of nervous going into it. No, there's like no sex, so you don't have to worry about that. I think honestly it was more of like, they made a big deal of her sexual orientation because they wanted to like show, hey, we've got representation in this story, so if you're into that sort of thing, if you're looking for that, this is a story for you. And then as far as like emphasizing, oh, she likes dirty magazines, I think it's just feeding into the type of character she is. It's feeding into her traits. It's trying to present her as like, this is not your usual heroine. And so if you are nervous about that, don't be. It's not a big deal. Honestly, I think the most you get in the first book is some offhand comments, maybe some crass comments, some vulgarity, but really beyond that, not too much. I think maybe we see a married couple kiss in that book. But overall, yeah, it's even less than this book, and this book only really had kissing and then off-screen mentions. So, overall, I would definitely say that this is an adult book. If you are sensitive or squeamish, approach with caution. But yeah, I was kind of pleasantly surprised that the sex and nudity was a-okay. I have no idea how it'll be for Nona the Ninth, and then eventually when it comes out, Alecto the Ninth. But as far as the first two books go, yeah, the only thing you have to worry about is a lot of profanity and a lot of violence. But if that's your cup of tea, happy reading.